Weekend, Chris Wallace asked former Defense Secretary Gates about Crimea, and the question was, you think Crimea is gone? Gates said, I do. Your thoughts?
I don't buy that, Sean. I think this is a very, very big deal in terms of what Putin has just pulled off here. He has violated the agreement that was signed up to back in '94 by the U.S., Russia, the UK, and the Ukraine, that in return for giving up their intercontinental ballistic missiles, they had some SS-18s, nuclear armed. The Ukrainians' borders would be recognized and respected. And he's just blown that clear out of the water. It is clearly an effort on his part to reassert control over what he sees as part of the old Soviet Union, and he's well established his view. I think he's totally misguided, but his view that one of the great disasters of the 20th century was when the Soviet Union went out of business. That's just simply not the case. It was one of the great success stories of the 20th century. It meant that millions of people throughout Eastern Europe and then the republics of the old Soviet Union now live in freedom, and a lot of them under democratic governments, and they're independent sovereign states. And he needs to recognize that, and he clearly has failed to do so. The consequences of this, if it's not addressed by those of us who have supported Europe and NATO in the past and the breakup of the old Soviet Union, it means big trouble.
Well, then, if these are not the end, if this is not the end of his territorial ambitions here, and you think that this is not over, what do you think? What options do we have available in your mind?
Well, I think that we clearly do have a wide range of options. The important point from my perspective is that he be made to pay a very high price so that he's not tempted to do this again. Now, that can come in the form of economic sanctions. It can come in the form of destroying demand for his energy product. That's about half of his economy. With our capacity and growing capability to support others, we certainly ought to be doing that in terms of making our products available to Europe. I think we ought to reverse the decline that Obama is imposing on the Defense Department. Part of the problem is, I think our allies out in that part of the world are very concerned. If you look at the Baltics, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, they all have Russian populations, at least a part of them. They border Russia. Tomorrow, if Putin is successful in the Crimea, who's to say he won't decide to tell the folks up in Lithuania or Latvia or Estonia that he wants part of their territory because it's got Russians on it. This really is something that has major significance, and I think when, as some of my friends have said, that I'll let him have the Crimea, I think that's a huge mistake.
I think economic sanctions, I agree that's the way to go, and you also talked about destroying their demand by increasing our production of energy, but in the short term, our European allies are impotent because they are reliant and dependent on those 18 pipelines going through Ukraine, no?
Yes, they are dependent to varying degrees. Some are more dependent than others. But I wouldn't stop there. I think it's also, Sean, important to remember that sanctions on energy are a two-way street for him. He's more reliant on energy than anybody else. It's half his economy. They haven't developed the way they should have in recent years, and so they're totally dependent to a large extent in terms of their budget and in terms of their economy for those exports. And to the extent they interfere with those markets and the supplier or the consumers go elsewhere, that's a big hit on them. But I'd also get into the military. I think it's very important to re-energize NATO. Some of the nations that would be threatened, like the Baltic states, for example, are all full members of NATO. We have a solemn obligation under Article 5 to honor the proposition that an attack upon one is an attack upon all. I'd be talking with the Ukrainians about training and possible supply of equipment. I'd be doing NATO exercises right up close to the Russian border. I think it's very, very important we not underestimate the significance of this event. And frankly, I'm disturbed when I see so many people saying, well, it's just the Crimea. It's not just the Crimea. It's a significant effort on his part to reverse the downfall, if you will, of the Soviet Union and try to regain a lot of that territory which voted for independence and sovereignty as the old Soviet Union fell apart.
I think all your suggestions are good ones. I would add to it, if I could, one thing, and I would deploy the missiles that the president pulled back on, missile defense for Poland and the Czech Republic. But there's one thing you keep focusing on, and that is, wouldn't just the threat I've interviewed John Hofmeister, former CEO of Shell Oil, and his contention is we have more energy with shale, oil reserves, natural gas, and coal than the entire Middle East combined. Wouldn't the threat of more production in and of itself probably stop or at least tie the hands of Vladimir Putin? Wouldn't that put a lot of fear into his heart quickly?
Well, I think it would if he believes it. But he sees a president who won't even authorize the Keystone Pipeline. The project's been there for years now, ready to go. It doesn't cost a dime of federal money. It will create jobs. It'll significantly increase our overall supplies of energy. Everybody agrees it's a good idea, except Barack Obama, who has the authority and refuses to act. So part of our problem is that all of these are good ideas. I'm wholeheartedly in accord with the notion of reinstating our missile defenses in Poland and the Czech Republic. But a big part of the problem we have is we have an administration who isn't viewed as inclined to keep its word or to keep its commitments. He simply hasn't backed up his bold rhetoric.
The recent Gallup poll thought that most Americans think that the world perceives him as weak. Do you perceive him as weak? There was a lot of criticism in the years that you and President Bush were in office, that you guys were too aggressive. Of course, you had to respond to 9/11, but do you think this president, do you think he's perceived by leaders in the Middle East, in Russia, elsewhere in the world as being a weak president when it comes to national security?
Yes, I do. I hear from some of those people. I'm still in touch with a lot of the governments that I dealt with over the years. Excuse me. And I know for a fact that they don't believe he will keep his commitments or back up his rhetoric. Syria was a classic example that turned a lot of people off.
All right, Mr. Vice President, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.